So we are going to talk about DOM events today, events on the document object model. Um, this is, I think it's pretty fun because it's where you can actually start interacting with the page instead of just displaying stuff and doing stuff programmatically without any user interaction. Yeah, let's just pop into it. What is an event? So events are in JavaScript and in a lot of other programming languages, modern languages. An event is at its core just a message. In JavaScript and other languages, it's often implemented as an object. So the capital E event is a type of object, and those are created by, in our case, the browser, whatever the client is, or the runtime. They're created when certain things happen. So when it detects that a user clicks on a button, or the window moves, or someone presses a key, or a form is submitted, or the mouse moves. Each one of those things throws an event. And it basically what it does is creates an object, says, hey, event object, you're this kind of event, and just throws it in the air. If no one's listening for that event, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. So when we, and believe me, every little piece of thing on your web pages are throwing a billion events all the time. But they don't do anything unless we listen to them. So I'll talk to the listening part in just a second. So why do we do this? Why do we use events for this? There's a few different reasons, right? The primary one being that it allows us to program in a kind of asynchronous manner. If we displayed a web page and then somehow it just waited for us to do something, we wouldn't know what it was. Like oh, okay, we're gonna make this web page. It's gonna hang tight until you submit this form or whatever, and then we can't do anything else on the page. So asynchronous programming, you're gonna see a lot all over the place with events and fetch and all sorts of stuff. But basically, that allows us to not precisely do more than one thing at a time because JavaScript is still pretty single-threaded, but effectively do multiple things at a time, wait for stuff to come back, do them at their designated time when they happen. So that's why we use that like event model in JavaScript. And it's part of the language definition. So we have things throwing events in reaction to things that happen. And so we need to listen to those events. So it's kind of you'll hear people talk about subscribing to them as well, or subscribing to an event on an object. And again, that's just listening for a message that the thing throws or sends out. So yeah, let's look at the code, or let's start making code happen, and we'll talk about it live there. Share screen, I guess. I want to get rid of that and this screen. Fantastic. Cool. So that is my Discord. This is what I want. So I've made a folder. It's called DOM events. There's nothing in it yet. Let me go ahead and set up a index HTML. Boom. And an index JS. And like that here. And it's not a self-closing tag. It's a JavaScript file, and we're going to defer it. And we're not going to just close that tag. There we go. Cool. And I have a live server installed. This is an extension you can install in VS Code that basically just starts up a really lightweight web server. What that means is it's going to look in the directory that it's in and start with the index.html file and start displaying that page in a browser. The fun thing about it is that as you make changes on your in your code, the page automatically updates, so you don't have to like go back and reload and whatnot. I also have my so I've changed it. I've also had my VS Code set up to autosave on focus change. So, it's not saved now. If I just go to the other window, it automatically saves. And that saves me like when I'm coding. I code by making a lot of mistakes and fixing them as fast as I can. So making that sort of make a change, see it in the browser, fix your broken shit, go back to the browser, go back, making that cycle as fast as possible is super useful for me. So like I'll change something and then go to the browser and then come back and then do that. So what we want to do is hit live server, and ideally that will start us up. Great, then we show that again. Cool. Let me just get this out of the way. And this over here. Cool. So this is our document. If we look in the console, booyah, awesome. We don't have a fake icon. Don't worry about that. That's just a little thing that shows up here. It always looks for it. But cool. So live reload is enabled. If I just flip back to here and change my JavaScript to blah, and just flip back to it, boop, it changes that. So that's pretty cool. So now that we're set up here, we've got our HTML and we've got our JavaScript set up. Let's talk about, well, you know what? Let's talk about what kind of events that are available for us to listen to. And even if you didn't have the documentation in front of you, you can always, of course, go to MDN events, and it'll give you all the events that you've got here. But even without that reference, most of the events are triggered by things that we are used to as users of the internet. Just shout out some events we might want to listen to, or actions that we might have an event that gets thrown. Anyone can go.
Clicks.
Clicks. Yeah. Let me do
like a submission.
Yeah.
Hovering over something.
Mouse scroll.
Yeah. Hover, scroll.
Keystroke.
Yeah. Keystroke. Keys are interesting. Does anyone know offhand what the actual events are for keys?
Key down.
Key down and key up. Key press used to be used, but it's not anymore.
Yeah, I mourn key press. But yeah, key down, key up is definitely what we got here. Can I just save this as a nope, that's not what I want to do. Oh, it's rebelling. There we go. DOM events. So get some fancy formatting. Cool. And what is this event? We talked about that already. Get all fancy formatting. There we go. Cool. Click, submit, hover. What else we got?
Double click.
Double click. Is that a separate event? I don't know off the top of my head. Let's find out. Event. I don't know if it is. Oh, there we go. It's part of the click event. Yeah. So the event properties, it's got a bunch of properties on it, and it's which one is it? I think it's the detail or something. Yeah, it has a detail property. So that property would be 2 for a double click, 3 for a triple click. I don't know if there's a right click event either. There's got to be. I mean, clearly there's some way to do it. Yeah. How do you capture right events? There's a way. Cool. Yeah. So double click. Yeah, there's one other interesting one that I don't think is super obvious, and that is a change event or on change. And both a lot of these are going to be like on click, on submit, on hover. Change event is usually attached to a form field or something like that, and that throws a change event when something in that when the value of that field changes. So if we have a text field, when you type in it, instead of listening for the key downs and key ups, you can listen for on change and get the new values there. Cool. So let's add a simple thing to our page here. I'm just going to add a button. I'm going to give it an ID. Test button. And just the click me. And if we go back and look at our thing, there's our click button. Great. I know this works. I'm going to take this out. Oh, there is one other event, now that I'm thinking of it, that I think is still mentioned in the curriculum, but we probably won't be using much. Anyone know what that might be?
The tap.
Mm.
Is that a mobile only?
Yeah, I think that might be a mobile only thing. I'm thinking more in relation to loading our JavaScript.
If we're using defer already, then we probably don't need DOMContentLoaded.
Exactly. Yeah. So back in the old days, a couple of years ago, we would attach a listener to documents. And we would add event listener there, and we'd listen for DOMContentLoaded. If we're using defer, we don't need to do that anymore. That pretty much does that exact same thing, only with one word instead of a lot of typing. Just know that it's there. You might see it. You might see it in other people's code. You might see it in some older exercises or labs here, but use defer and don't worry about it. Cool. So we've got this button. I think all I want to do is when we click it, we'll just console log something. So to do that, we need to attach an event listener to that element, which means that first we need to grab that element. So can anyone tell me, how about Wes, how do I grab that button element, that test button?
Is this when we do add event listener?
So we need to grab the element that we are adding the event listener to first.
Okay, so is that going to be oh man, I'm blanking. Document dot
Phone a
is
friend.
it? Yeah, or the query select
Yeah.
or get element by ID or by
Yeah.
class, one of
I
those
prefer
things.
get element by ID, but
Okay.
query select will also do the
Okay.
same thing, the query selector.
Yep.
So our element, the ID is test button, btn. And this will return that element. So that means we want to grab it here. Test button. So now if we look at our browser here, we can actually look at, oops, let's look at test button. Test button. That's going to give us that element there. Great. So now that we have that, now we can hook up our event listener. So no, we haven't done this yet. So we'll do test button, and pretty much already said it, right? Add event listener. So add event listener takes at least two arguments. The first one is going to be the type of the event that we're listening for, and that's going to be a string. So we're going to look for an on click on this one. And if you ever get confused or get that on click, or wonder if something exists or whatever, you can always look it up on MDN, and it will not only tell you the thing as not caps.
Is on click different than click?
Yeah. So you know what? it's confusing sometimes because there are multiple ways to add them, and some ways are older and not really used anymore. Some of them use the and then come back newer. So we used to do just in the HTML, do something like onClick equals blah 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 blah. It's fine. I would recommend never ever doing that. When we add the event listener, you're totally right. It is a click, not an onClick. Click event. Yeah, click. So, but when we start looking at React in the next phase, we're going to go back to on event stuff. So yeah, for now, events are just the single word without the on. Yeah, cool.
Wait, you said for now in the HTML, or yeah, don't use the onclick thing in the HTML.
Yeah, that's a old and busted. Yeah, because
I used that in my pre-work at some point.
Oh, probably, yeah. And it works. Rule 1, so it's fine. The reason we like to attach them like this now is that putting the JavaScript in line with the HTML kind of muddies things up. And so like if someone's working on a JavaScript file and the HTML has some click handling built into it, that could conflict and cause troubles. This is going to be contradicted when we look at React, or apparently contradicted. But yeah, so for now, we're attaching them in the JavaScript to an event. Does that answer what you're asking?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Sweet. Second part. Well, spoiler. It's our callback function, is our listener here. So this is going to be a function, kind of like the function that we passed to for each yesterday. It's going to be a function that takes some secret argument and does something, right? So let's go ahead and actually write a function that does a thing that we want to do. Let's say handle click. So it might take something, probably, but right now I just wanted to console log. You got me. So cool. This is not going to do anything by itself yet, but we need to hook it up to the event. So we can either write a function in line with arrow stuff, or we can pass it an event like this. And remember, when we're passing functions, we're just passing it by the name of it. We don't execute it there. Functions in JavaScript are what they call first-class objects, which just means they're objects just like anything else, like a string or an array or an event, which means that handle click, once I've defined that function, is a concrete thing that I can pass around. Sometimes like talk about it's like an envelope full of instructions and his name is written on the outside. You can say like, here is the handle click envelope with the instructions, you got me. And when you open up the envelope with your parentheses, that's when you execute the code inside. So basically what we're doing here is saying, hey, test button, listen for the click event, ignore all the other events for now. And when you do that, take the envelope I gave you named handle click, open it up and execute the instructions for me. Cool. So let's see if that actually works. I bet it does. We'll find out. Hey, we did it. You got me. Cool. So that is like the dead simple basic way to do an event listener.
Mark, sorry, quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
So instead of like having the function outlined there, I saw you were starting to do the arrow function. When would the arrow function ever be like useful over there, or is this like best practice for like like on the job?
Yeah. Great question. So functions and arrow functions are, I'm not going to say identical, but they do the same thing. What are the differences? The differences, the main difference is that an arrow function it doesn't it automatically returns something if you don't have it in quotes. So if for whatever reason I want to do like return the value 45, or if I wanted to take an argument and return, that argument times 2, that's great. And you can do, the same thing here in, why is it doing that for me? I just lost my train of thought. I can do this. So the advantage to doing this is that, if it's a single little thing like this, you don't have to write a separate function for it. The downside is you can't reuse that. So if you have a function that's being used in more than one place, probably defining it separately is good. You can still define it as an arrow function out here if you want to by doing, console log, whatever. So these two things do the same thing. The main difference with externally declared ones here is that this is actually this is a function expression, and an expression in JavaScript just means that it returns a value. In this case, the value is the function itself. So if we try to attach it to our listener, it wouldn't exist yet. So we'd get an error. So when you're doing that, you have to move them up here. But the fun thing about regular functions is that they basically JavaScript doesn't pass through the file first and to catch all the functions that you define. So you can define them anywhere and they'll work. More to the point, I think you're asking when would we use arrow functions in line like this. It's a matter of taste. You're gonna see, and probably in the next day or two, you're gonna see me doing that a lot, just because things, if it's just one thing, sometimes it's just easier to read there, especially if it's a unique thing that you're not going to be doing over and over again. For me, as a rule 2 thing, like if it's easier to understand, I'll do that. Otherwise, I'll break it out. But you'll see it both ways for sure. I'd say it's like 80% taste, 20% like doing it for a specific reason. Does that kind of get what you're asking?
Yeah, that was exactly it. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and like in this case, it feels better to me to say, hey, test button, listen for a click, and when you get clicked, run this function, handle the click. And the I'm a big stickler on semantics, so naming things right. So I can say like, do thing, and call it do thing. That doesn't really tell you, like when you get clicked, do the thing. Still works. It's exactly the same. And even now, handle click and handle click, it tells me I'm handling the click button or the click event, but just this line in isolation, I don't really know what it does. In this case, a better one might be, a log message. So now at least I can read this and say, oh, when I click, it's going to log a message. Again, you can name it ham sandwich if you want. And it'll work just as fine. It's just when you come back to it next month and you're like, oh, what did I do? What did I do to myself? It's going to be so many times. You always want to write code so it's easier for other people to read as well. And you, a month from now, is someone else as well. So treat your future self nice and name things what they do. Awesome. Thank you for asking that, though. That was right when I would like to pause for questions about the basics here. So if anyone else has anything they want to ask, now is a great time. Feel like we got the basics. Cool. So sweet. I said there's a secret thing that is passed to our event listener by default. So when an event listener is thrown and caught and called by the thing it's listening to, what it does is it passes the event automatically as an argument. So that means we're still passing the name of the event here, but the definition says I'm expecting, sorry, the name of the event listener, but it's always going to be expecting something. And again, I like to call it event or E. That's just going to be the first parameter is the event. And that's the message itself that got thrown up. And that's useful for a bunch of different reasons. Yeah. One of the, so this is a little bit weird case, I guess. But we can handle, we can process this event in lots of different ways because an event has a lot of pieces to it. We can even just console log the event to take a look at it. We clicked, so there's our pointer event. So that's what the actual type of the event is. That's the class name of it, not the name that we're using to call it. And it's got all of these things in it. One of the things that we are going to most often be looking at is the target. And this is tricky to remember, especially when we get to forms. The target of the event is always the item that threw the event. So if I'm clicking a button, target's going to be the button itself. If I'm doing an on change on a form, it's going to be that form element itself. If I do a submit on a form, it's going to be the whole form. So yeah, target is always a thing that threw the event, whether it's a click or typing or move or whatever. Cool. So let's, yeah, let's, and again, nothing special about these functions except it takes an event. It's just JavaScript. Let's take a look at another kind of event listener. Let's do a form field. Type equals text. I'm going to give it an ID for now. Test text. Yeah, I think that's all I need now. I can actually close that one off by itself. So we should get a little text field in here. Great. So I'm going to add a different event listener to that. Oh, and one of the things that is not intuitive, but some people discover by themselves, you can add more than one event listener to a thing. You can even have the same event listener multiple times. If I wanted to, have it do this, 4 times, I could just do that, or I could add other ones to it, or I could add different kinds of events to it, event listeners to it. So one object can have as many event listeners as you want. Normally, you don't come across that very much. Occasionally, you will come across it accidentally. But yeah, just something to keep in mind. So yeah, let's write. Let's grab our text field, and we've got an ID here. It is test text. So, whoops. I'm going to say text. ID and that there. And just to show an outline. There's that. Highlights when we go over it. Cool. So, one of the interesting things, so different elements have different properties, clearly, because they're different things. Anyone know what, so after we add the event listener, if we've typed something in this text field, anyone know offhand the property we want to grab to get that text or set it?
The value.
Yeah, value. And I have a follow-up question after I hook up this event. So let's throw our event listener on there. So this one I'm going to listen for to change. So I'm going to listen for the change event. And let's say log text value. So we've got this here. Again, it's going to take the event as an argument. Great. So, and I'll just do a, again, do that to make sure that it is working. So when I type in here, we should get some garbage on the, no. Yeah, there it is. Cool. Boop. Boop. Interesting. So we want it to not just log out a garbage string. We want it to log out the value of the event. Or sorry, the value of the text field. So that gives us two questions, right? So the sort of straightforward, obvious way of doing it would be like, oh, we have the text field here. So we can just like console log test text dot value, because that will give us the text field value. So do that. Now it'll give us the value. That's fine. Any thoughts about why that might not be the best way to do it?
Wouldn't it log it just about every time they change anything in it? So if you like delete one letter, would it log it again?
In theory, yeah. But I don't think that's really the problem that we're looking at. But that's a good thing to think about. What if I had another one, and I wanted to do the same thing? So copy paste. So I'm going to grab that second one there, and I'm going to add the same event listener to it, because I want to do the same thing. I don't want to rewrite the function, right? So now I don't know which field this function is going to be talking about, right? Either one that I type into, it's going to only give me the value of the first one. So I need to somehow figure out which thing is being changed according to something that is given to me. Any thoughts about what that might be, or any ideas what direction we might want to head?
Would you use event target or something like that?
Absolutely, yeah. So remember, the event target is the thing that threw the event. So in our case, the event target is the thing that we're listening on, which is the field that is calling it, whichever one we're hitting. So if we get that target and we get that value, and now we type here, that gives us that one. Now we type here, and that gives us that one, and only that one. So this is really powerful, and you're going to be using it a lot. There's a, how deep do I want to get into this? So we kind of want to, when we're looking at functions, if we can help it, not rely on stuff outside of the function. Ideally, the function is going to take some arguments, do some stuff, and maybe return a value. Ideally, it shouldn't be depending on stuff outside of the function or changing stuff outside of the function. Sometimes there's no way around that, but in general, try to sort of skew your thinking towards, this function exists in isolation. Anyone could call it from anywhere. How can I make this work without changing or relying on anything from the outside? And this lets us do that. Since we get the event coming into the function, we always know what's being thrown and where it's being thrown from. So yeah, I think I don't need to talk about that much more. Sweet. So that is attaching the same function to multiple elements at the same time. Any questions so far? Cool. I think I'd like to, I think next, let's do a form. Actually get rid of all this stuff here. So form, a form is an HTML element that won't have an action right now. It's an element. I'm going to call it, I'm going to say test form. None of these are good descriptive names. So before we do anything, I'm just going to go ahead and say, hey, grab my form, test form. Great. So I'm confident I'm getting that. So I have the form itself. The form is going to have stuff inside of it. Basically, form is a collection of input elements with some other stuff in it, labels or whatnot. In our case here, let's just have two things. We'll do like a first and last name. So input type equals text. And I'm not going to give it an ID here. I will give it a name. And it'll be called first name. I'm going to put each one of these inside of a little, well, yeah, I'm going to put each one inside of a div. I don't like using divs for everything, but it's the easiest thing to do it with. So that's what I'm going to do right now. We're going to do a section, I guess. No, div is fine. All right. And I'm going to do another one for the last name. Let me actually put a label on this as well. Cool. Let's see if that looks okay. Yeah, that'll do. And let's put another button on here. So before we just had a button. How would we specify, well, a submit button to kind of give it away? Thoughts?
Just make it say submit.
Just like that.
That makes me think that's wrong.
I mean, it's good to have there for sure. So forms are special in that they need to be submitted. And when you submit a form, you submit the whole thing at once. Instead of having a button that just like goes through and collects a bunch of stuff from random inputs. And we can actually just specify the type equals submit. And that's going to do something special. When there's a button of type submit inside of a form, it's going to say, cool, I'm going to take this entire form and throw a submit event up, and it'll have all the information we need attached to that event. It does something peculiar though, and we'll talk about when we get there. Cool, but for now, let's add an event listener on here. So we've got our test form, and let's just start off easy. We're going to add our submit, and let's just say we're just going to say handle submit, and we'll write that function here. It's going to take an event, and let's just log out that event, make sure stuff is working, and we can see everything that's inside there. Yeah. So we've got our first name, we've got our last name, we've got our submit, so we can type stuff in here. Anyone want to venture guess what's going to happen when we hit that submit button?
Like if I remember correctly, it has like a default property to it where it refreshes the whole page.
Yeah, exactly. So if we submit here, you might be able to see real quickly You can't see my finger. When I click over here, we see the event real quick and then it goes away. And the form clears out. So by default, a submit does something called a post, and you'll learn about that more tomorrow. Normally we would give, yeah, sure. Normally we would, or not normally, way back, we would give in that method property in the form that we saw, we would give it like a web location to go to. We don't really want to do that anymore. We want to handle our own stuff. So there's that default action, and we would like to prevent that. So how might we get around this here in our function, in our event handler?
You put event dot prevent default.
Yeah. Cool. And so what that says is take the event, which we're being thrown, and some AI is trying to record the chat. Cool. So it's saying take that event that the form threw, and whatever it was going to do, make sure it doesn't do that before we do anything else. So now we should at least get the event, and it's not refreshing. All our stuff is still there. So we've got our target, and that's going to be handy. The target, of course, is the form itself. We can see it's highlighted there. And it's got all of our things here. So there's a bunch of different ways to get stuff. It has them in kind of in order, so you can grab them from the target via an index. But you can also, it doesn't show up on the element here, but if there's a form event and you have names on your form fields, you can refer to them by name. So I'm just going to try to do event, and I want to get the target, which is the form itself, and I'm just going to say first name, or lowercase first name. And since this is an object, that's why I didn't name it like first dash name or something like that, first space name, because we want to easily refer to it by its name there. And just for kicks, I'll do last name too. Cool. How confident are we that this is going to work? My real name even. 80%, 90%, 30%. I feel pretty good about it. Let's see what happens. Aha! It's only giving us the fields themselves. So how do we get what's in the fields again?
You do the value thing.
Yeah, we can do the value right here. Cool. So now, boom, now we get those there. Great. That's great. One little cool thing I'd like to do is clear out the form when we're done. And there's a few different ways to do that. You can set the events to nothing. You can also say event target, because we're looking at the form. Reset. I believe that's it. I might be lying. So that'll give us that, bloop. Yeah, that'll clear out the form for you. So you have to, when you have a submission form that has like a dozen elements, you don't want to do them all one at a time. So reset will do that for you. Cool. Yeah, I think there's one more thing I want to talk about here. But before we move to that, any questions about what we've seen so far?
A lot of times, like when you're logging in to like a website, you have like a username and password. Like if you are in username and you hit tab, it'll just automatically go to like the password like section. Is that like an event that you have to create, or oh no, it just automatically does that?
Yeah, that's so there's a thing called tab order, one word, capital O, in the I think it's things set on the form, and by default it kind of does it logically, just goes in the order that it sees them on the page. If for some reason you want to alter that tab order, you can programmatically. I have to look it up every time though, so if you're curious about that, MDN is a great place to look. But yeah, by default it will do that tab behavior. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool, cool, cool. Anything else?
So for the prevent default, so the submit button just automatically by default will refresh the page, and you can just put that in, and you don't have to specify anything. It will just stop it.
Yep, yeah, exactly. It says it's preventing the default action of the page. Sweet. Anything else?
Sorry, one more question.
No, never apologize.
Since we're doing the prevent default, would we still need to do the event target reset or?
Yeah, because this is the thing, whether we clear it or not, that's the thing that tells us to, whether we post it or not, that's the thing that says clear that out. It doesn't do that by itself.
I'm at the opposite. I'm sorry. Since we have the target reset, will we still need the prevent default?
Oh yes, yeah, great question. Yeah, because those do two different things, right? Reset is basically just a method on the form object that says clear all your fields. So prevent default is the thing that says, hey, don't do that post action. Don't go to a new page. They're the two separate things. What else? All right. Let's get fancy. I'd like to, when I submit, instead of logging it out, I want to add it to the page. And you know what? I'll do a list. Why not? So I'm going to add an unordered list here. Make it an ordered list. Why not? I'm going to give that list an ID. Call it user list. And there's not going to be anything in it to start off. I'm going to grab that up here. Yeah, cool. So I think what I would like to happen here is when I submit the form, I would like the first and last name added to that list. Anyone have any ideas about where to even start there?
Instead of
Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
all right, instead of console logging, would you add a new item to the list?
Absolutely, yeah. So let's do that here. Let's give our const new list item, or I'll call it new user for short. Const new user, that's going to be a new list item in that order list. So I'm going to say document create. Nope. Create element. I'm going to make it a list item. Sweet. So how do we add these two things like combined into one word to that list item?
Would you append them?
Yeah, you can definitely append them. I would probably do it with a different way since I'm just changing the text, but appending will work for sure. I'm actually going to start off by doing this here, just to make less typing. I'm going to say, const target, target, or I'm going to say form. Do that form. Cool. And I'm going to say full name. I'll use a template literal here. So that'll be target first name value. Last name value. So cool. So now I have a string there. I'm going to take this off. So now I have a string that I want to add there, a piece of text content. So I will add that text content to the new user. Sweet. And our last step to make it show up on the page.
I want to say append.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll say user list, because that's the thing we're appending to. Append new user. Fantastic. I feel pretty good about this. Let's see what happens. So nothing down here yet. Do marker major, that's me. Yeah, let's see what happens. Target is not defined. Yeah, you know what? Because I used form instead. There we go. Always believe the error messages. Hey, look at that. Oh, and one of the other cool things I neglected to mention about submitting instead of just using a button, you don't even have to have a button. One of the cool things about submit is, if there's no button to hit and you have a submit event hooked up, you can hit return. Oh, am I lying? Does it need the button? It needs the submit button. Oh, so bad. It's gonna be so cool. But here, now I can not click and hit the return button and it adds it. So that's the advantage of using a submit in a form over buttons that just do stuff, because buttons won't let you do that. But cool, yeah, it looks like it did the thing. And that will go on forever. Yeah, so this is to demonstrate that we're hooking together our two things, right? Yesterday we learned how to manipulate the DOM, so we can add, create, remove, change stuff with JavaScript. And now that we have event listeners, we can do all that stuff by clicking or typing or hitting a submit button or moving the mouse or anything like that. So hooking up the events with the DOM manipulation, super handy. And we're gonna have a lot of fun with that over the next couple of weeks. I had one more thing to say. What was it? I don't know. It'll come to me. Oh, so right now we're just creating these things and throwing them on the DOM. If we wanted to delete them somehow or change them somehow, edit them, what are some roadblocks there? And what are some things to think about? Just like any idea.
If you have like a typo when you're writing the name.
Say that again?
If you have like a typo when you're writing the name, you can't change it after.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. So again, that sort of model and view thing that we talked about yesterday. In general, we're like separating our data from the way it's presented. So we can present it in different ways, or so it's not as tightly bound, so we can kind of debug it and work with it separately. Right now, our data, our model data, is what we type in here, and we are directly adding it to the DOM and then forgetting the data itself. If we needed to get it, we could probably, like, oh, I'm gonna get the value of this. I'd have to click it or something, or click something nearby it, and then grab the target and then, like, look at the value and remember the way that the text was added. It's two separate parts, and I have to split it apart. And if we're dealing with numbers, we have to make sure they get turned into numbers instead of strings. It's a big hassle. So a different way to do this is to keep the data separate from the display, keep the model separate from the view. And so I'm gonna do a little refactor here just to make that a little bit easier as we go forward. Yeah. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take like this stuff out and add it to its own function. I'm gonna call it add user. And so add users is going to be a function. It's just going to take a first name and a last name. Cool. And so now we can just put those in here. And so now, instead of adding them directly, we'll call this function. First name, lowercase. Yeah, we'll add all this like that. Boom. Nope, that's not what I want to do. Not what I want to do at all. So any good refactoring should not change the behavior of the code. So let's see if this still works, if I completely broke it. Cool, still works. So, but we're still just smacking that on there. So I'm going to think about, so before I start typing away, I want to think about what my data is and how I display it. So the data that I want to keep track of is the usernames, first and last name. And there's going to be a bunch of those. So I probably want to keep them in some collection, like an array. So I'm just going to say up here, I'm going to start off by saying user array. Bad name for it, but I'll take it. We're just going to set that to an empty array. And so let's think about this. How would we represent a user with a first name and a last name in here? I think I might want to use an object because that lets us do key values. So if I said, first name is Joe, last name is Banger. So here's a user. Let's say we had a couple. Let's put 2 users in there. Great. So we've got 2 users in there, and instead of taking these from the form, I would just like to put each of those on the page when we start up. So I want to render those onto the page. I think I'm just going to call a function. I'm going to create a function here. Call render user list, say. And here is where I'm going to sort of go against what I talked about before. I want to reference that user list because it's kind of global to the whole thing. I want to reference that user list to inside my function, I think. I could pass it in, I think, but that might be less clear. So for now, I'm just going to reach outside the function and grab it and use it. And so what do I want to do to each one of those users? So I have my user array. And I want to say, I want to, for each one, I want to put it on the page. So I can do it for each here. And I can't just pass the function in because it's a little bit different, right? Because we're looking for an object. So there's a couple of things I could do. I could kind of mess around in here, or I could change add user to take an object. I'm not going to complicate it that much. I'm going to leave it the way it is, so I don't have to fuss with that. I'm going to do it this way here. So render user list. We're going to look at each element in the list, or each user, and we're going to say, hey, I'm going to add that user with the user first name and user last name. Cool. So now all I'm saying is when the page starts up, before we do anything with the form at all, when the page starts up, oh, we should call it, I guess. So I'm just going to call this. And so when the page loads up, we're going to define this array. We're going to do some stuff here. And then we're going to define these functions, and then we're just going to call render user list. So what I expect to happen is that when it calls render user list, it's going to look at the user array, which we have stuff in already. It's going to go through each one. It's going to try and add those users. Let's see if that works. Hey, it does. Cool. And actually, there's one more thing I would like it to do. Just in case, for some reason, we want to call that more than once. We don't want the names to show up both times. So I think I'd like to, when I render the user list, I think I want to clear it out. There's a few ways to do that. I think I'm just going to do it the quick and dirty way and just say user list inner HTML is nothing. So that will clear it out before we add stuff to it. And now there should be, why no work? User list inner HTML. Oh, that's in the handle submit. That's why. Oops. Cool. Now that should work. Yes. So now anytime we call render user list, we're going to clear it out first and then render all the users onto it. And now we have a way to separate our data and our form. So let's get rid of our default users here. So in our handle submit, right now we're just calling add user and throw it on there. So it's just adding it to the page without changing our data here. Because if I can look at our data, and we might want to use this data in another part of our application, right? So if I look at user list or user array, we can see what's in it and use it somewhere else maybe, or reference it for somehow, even if it's not on the page. So get rid of that. So I think instead of adding user here, since we're already using it in render list, instead of doing this, what I'm going to do is add our user to the array. So I'm going to say user array push, and I'm just going to add our, so I need to add first name is that. And last name, is this. And then after I push it onto the array, then I want to render our user list. So the flow here is when we start at the page, we empty out our user list. We grab our stuff, we set up our functions. When the user puts something in the form field and hits submit, and we're listening for that here, we're going to add a new user to our user array with the first name and last name from the field. And then we're going to render the whole user list, which clears out the list and renders them all out. Seems wasteful. It's not. HTML is fine for this. Rule 3, don't worry about it until it's a problem. And then when it renders list, it's going to take everything from that array and put it on the list. So let's see if this works at all. Hey, so now it works exactly the same as before. And I can say Vin and Jake. So we've got a couple users here. If in another part of my application, I want to look at the user array, oh, look, I can see what the user put in and I can do stuff with it. In fact, I could change it here. I could say user array, let's change Jake's last name to, but nothing's changed here. So we need to render the user list again. And now we've changed our data and updated our view. And so now our data and our presentation of that data are completely separate, which is something to strive for. If I asked you to do something like this today and you just did it the first way where you just throw them on the list, totally cool. This last 5 minutes or so is like the advanced, the 201. But it's definitely something we'll be seeing when we get to React a lot more. So it's good to kind of build that habit in your brain now. One of the strengths and weaknesses of JavaScript is that it's so flexible. So you can do stuff just like throw your stuff on the page or do all sorts of janky stuff and it'll work great. Rule one. But once you get a little experience, especially getting experience with doing it that way and then having to pull it apart to make it work a different way when you add more features, you start getting intuition for doing stuff like this. This is not intuitive at all to normal human beings who haven't done this 1,000 times. So don't worry about keeping everything separate like this. Don't worry about presentation. If you're just getting your hands into the handling events and changing the DOM, great. Do the most basic thing that works for you. This is aspirational. So if you come back and review this during project week or whatever, think about keeping your data and your presentation separate. But definitely a nice to have, not a must have. Awesome. I just talked for a long time. Let's take some questions before we wrap it up.
As far as like certain browsers not all supporting the same like list of like events, like is that a pretty rare thing? And like how would you go about like changing your events to like fit all browsers, or do you even worry about that?
Yeah, great question. For the most common stuff, submits and mouses and changes and some all that stuff, those are handled pretty much across the board. And you can look at MDN and see what browsers things are supported in. Pretty much everything you're going to use most of the time is going to be supported across the board. But if for some reason you need to support, Netscape 2 or Internet Explorer 4 or something, there are libraries that you can get, often called shims or something like that, that will basically like take your code and then kind of translate it into an older version that will work on more browsers. Most of the time, you're not going to have to worry about that. If you're building and deploying something that's going to have millions of users, you probably want to start thinking about it then. But for now, just aim for like what hits 99% of the browsers.
And it's just pretty rare, just in general.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, browsers are pretty, I'm not going to say standardized because there are standards, but not everyone follows them. But we're in a pretty good place now. Back in my day, it was bad. It was real bad, man. It was a real bad time. But yeah, things are way better now. And even if browsers aren't keeping up, there are libraries to make sure that your code works across the board. And again, we'll see more of that in phase 2 with React. We have a comment from the audience. Although semicolons are unnecessary, correct. They are not required by JavaScript. And this is something I might complain about when we get to phase 3 and 4. You don't have to use semicolons. There are rare cases where when you leave off a semicolon, it will do something that you don't expect. And that has happened to me a few times. But it's usually easy to fix. And this is probably just my old brain, used to stuff like this. I tend to prefer punctuation. So I like putting a semicolon at the end of a line, the same reason I like putting a period at the end of the sentence. There's nothing wrong with E.E. Cummings, but this is easier to read when you're trying to code something at the last minute. That said, if you prefer not using them, totally cool. The most important thing is if you are working on a team, that team may have standards, hopefully, and you'll work to the team's standards. So if they require semicolons, do that. If they require spaces instead of tabs, quit, or if you can't quit, do that. If they'll some places have even like code checkers before you can check something in that will either kick it back to you and say, hey, take out all the semicolons, we don't need them, or automatically format it when it submits it. Yeah, so again, this is a rule 2 area. It's going to work either way, but do whatever works best for you or your team, more importantly.
Yeah, I'm on the same side. I was just it was in response to JavaScript is, I forget what exactly you said, but it's way too nice to the programmer.
Yeah, I have a little comic I like to send out, JavaScript versus Java. It's fun. Super tangent right now. Spaces versus tabs. Again, do what works for you. It doesn't matter. Your editor will probably take care of it. In a team, I used to be a big spaces guy. Again, really doesn't matter. People get all head up about it. Until I read a persuasive argument. I've been a spaces guy for 20 years. But tabs are actually better for accessibility. So if you you will not always come across this, but you may come across. I've definitely I've worked with programmers who are sight impaired, and either bump up the terminal or change the settings or even use a screen reader or something. A tab is a token that says indent this. A space is just some spaces that doesn't really have any semantic meaning. So using tabs for indentation is a million times better for accessibility. If someone has vision problems, spaces make it really hard for them to adapt. So I would. It's no big change for me to switch my brain from like, oh, tabs instead of spaces now. As you can see, my browsers, my editors, but set the spaces, but whatever. Yeah, and it's a good thing to keep in mind in general. I think as a developer, it's good to have strong opinions about things, but I still think it's very important to keep those strong opinions loosely held. And if you're presented with compelling argument one way or the other, there's no ego. Just change your mind. That's a better thing. Yeah, it'll make you a way better programmer and probably a better person. Yeah, so super tangent. Any more questions about this stuff here?
This is not about this stuff, but with the whole semicolon thing, is it just like JavaScript, for example, where they're not required, or is it like all languages in general, or?
So every language is different. Some languages forbid the use of semicolons. Some require them. Some, like JavaScript or Python, doesn't really care. Some, like by convention, Python doesn't use them. You can put them in there, but no one does. Same with Ruby. So yeah, their languages are all different and they have different, syntax for doing stuff like that. And then cultures around those languages are also different. I think there's a 50-50 split in JavaScript, whether you use them or not. And I think it skews towards older programmers using semicolons and newer ones not. I have some thoughts about that, but yeah, languages are different. Cool. What else we got? Feeling good? Cool. Awesome. I will post this recording on the playlist and throw it in the channel as well. And yeah, if you have any more questions about anything like this or want further review, let me know and we'll hook you up. Cool. In that case, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see y'all in just a little bit.